He was a millionaire CEO with everything, except what truly matters, family. In a world where success is measured by numbers and titles, comes a story that will remind you what real wealth looks like. One unexpected note. One little girl. One chance at love. This is not just a story. It's a family-friendly tale of second chances, of love rediscovered, and the quiet strength that only family can give. If you believe in the power of love, if stories about family warm your heart, you're in the right place. Stay with us, because what happens next will move you in ways money never could. Daniel Whitmore, a man revered as a living legend in the world of finance, sat beneath the glimmering light of the most luxurious restaurant in the heart of Manhattan, a place where even the air itself seemed to breathe with a sense of style. He wasn't there to relax, he never truly relaxed, but to execute a familiar performance, dining, discussing global expansion plans, and maintaining a gaze as sharp as a blade, one that inspired both fear and admiration in his partners. At 42, Daniel had become the embodiment of calm forged through 1,000 ruthless negotiations. He was an artist of deliberate silence, a master in the art of nodding without truly listening. When a voice beside him said, "If we move forward with the Asian market expansion next quarter," Daniel merely nodded, his eyes still scanning the wine glasses, the flawlessly pressed linens, and the expensive suits barely hiding the anxious investors. Everything was going according to plan. Every move, every decision, every risk, he measured them like chess pieces on the board of life. There was no room for randomness. No time for sentiment. And absolutely no space for affection. But life, like the truffle foie gras just served, sometimes hides surprises beneath a glossy exterior. When the waiter gently lifted the porcelain plate, Daniel noticed something that didn't belong there, a small piece of paper, neatly folded, resting on the linen like a whisper from a distant world. With a mix of curiosity and caution, he picked it up, still wearing that signature smile, a smile honed over decades to be his most powerful negotiation tool. "Excuse me," he murmured, as if dealing with a particularly perplexing invoice, and opened the paper under the table. The handwriting appeared, childish but firm, and just a few lines made Daniel go still. "My mother, Emily, said she would die without telling you about me. I have your birthmark in my eye. She passed away last week. I'm at Willow Creek Orphanage. Signed, Sophie." Daniel's hand tightened, the paper trembling in his palm as though it carried the weight of a buried past. The sounds around him, laughter, clinking cutlery, pouring wine, suddenly felt foreign, as if he had stepped out of the present and been hurled back to a moment he had tried hard to forget. Emily. The name hit him like an unexpected undertow. How many years had it been? 9. 10. A decade of silence, avoidance, and choosing between heart and balance sheet. Daniel had chosen his empire. And he had never looked back. Until now. The wooden chair scraped against the floor, an abrupt sound that clashed with the refined ambience. "I have to leave. Family emergency," he said, even surprising himself with the words. Family, that word had never held a place in the dictionary of his life. 20 minutes later, the sleek black Bentley pulled up in front of Willow Creek Orphanage, a modest red brick building, with yellow light flickering in its windows like small eyes guarding secrets. Daniel sat motionless behind the wheel, his knuckles white from gripping the steering wheel. Not from the cold, but from fear. Inside, a silver-haired woman with tired eyes led him down a dim corridor. "She left instructions to contact you if anything happened to her," said Ms. Callahan, the orphanage director, her voice even but laced with a familiar sorrow. "Emily kept your information, though she never used it." "Where is she?" his voice rasped. The answer came not in words. It came when the door opened, and a little girl walked in. Sophie, 8 years old, her golden hair spilling like early autumn sunlight, and those eyes, oh, those eyes, deep, piercingly blue, and hauntingly familiar, so much so that he couldn't breathe. They were his eyes, and yet not only his, for within them also lived Emily's gaze, gentle, brave, and filled with waiting. She extended her tiny wrist, revealing a crescent moon crown bracelet. Identical to the one Daniel kept tucked away in a drawer, long forgotten. "Hello," the girl whispered, her voice as light as a breath. "I'm Sophie." He couldn't say a word. Not because he didn't want to, but because, for the first time in a very long while, Daniel Whitmore, who could negotiate with Japanese shareholders in fluent French, was utterly speechless before a truth so painfully simple. He had a daughter. And she was standing right in front of him. Ms. Callahan returned to the office with a thick stack of documents, carefully held together in a worn leather folder, as if it had been waiting for this day for a very long time. She gently placed the papers in front of Daniel, her voice soft but firm. "Emily Adams listed you as Sophie's biological father on her birth certificate." Daniel glanced at the file as though it were an ancient manuscript from a past he never intended to revisit. The letters were printed in crisp black ink, neat and indifferent, but just 3 words, "Father, Daniel Whitmore," were enough to collapse an entire world. She never pursued legal support or any formal recognition, Miss Callahan continued, her voice tinged with sorrow. "But she kept your information. As if, hoping that one day." She left the sentence unfinished, letting it drift into the air, just like Emily, the woman who had always left things unresolved in Daniel's life. Then she gently slid a few forms across the desk, the motion as soft as if she were inviting him to sign a contract with fate itself. "These are guardianship forms. Of course, we'll need to verify paternity, although." She glanced quickly at Sophie, then at Daniel, their matching blue eyes startling in their similarity. "The resemblance is quite convincing." Daniel nodded, but his mind was no longer processing language, it was doing what it did best, calculating. Every detail. Every step. Every consequence. 9 days. It had only been 9 days since Emily, the woman who was once the sweetest light in his life, passed away. And it had also been 9 days since Sophie stayed here, alone, among strangers, mourning her mother, with no one to hold her. No arms. No lullabies. No shoulder. "I want to bring her home," Daniel said abruptly, his voice firm, like issuing a command in a shareholder meeting. "Tonight." Ms. Callahan blinked, surprised, as if she had just heard a CEO ask to switch shifts to hold a baby. "Mr. Daniel," she began, her voice retaining the professional politeness of someone who'd worked with hundreds of abandoned children, "I appreciate your eagerness, but there are procedures." "I have a team of lawyers who can handle any procedure," Daniel cut in, his eyes flashing with the same steel that had made European CFOs sweat during negotiations. "But I will not let my daughter spend another night here." Sophie, tiny Sophie, in her faded sweater, looked up at the scene, saying nothing. Perhaps she was more used to adults leaving than coming for her. But for the first time, in that small heart of hers, something like hope had begun to take root. "This is not something to be rushed," Ms. Callahan said, this time with a tone blending expertise and emotion. "Becoming a parent overnight is no small challenge. Especially for someone with your lifestyle." "What do you mean by that?" Daniel's voice dropped, deeper now, tinged with caution. "I simply mean," she took a long breath. "Raising a child isn't about taking them shopping, then forgetting them in a Zoom call. It requires patience. Presence. Priority, and you, with your international schedule and 18-hour workdays, may not have that experience." Daniel said nothing. He couldn't deny that she wasn't wrong. For years, he had given every minute to financial reports, shares, profits, payrolls, and then more. And now, an 8-year-old child, a soul still in pain, needed him more than anything he'd ever owned. He turned to Sophie. She stood still, her small suitcase beside her, packed as if she had long prepared for the day she would leave. Her face was blank. No tears, no smile. As if she had learned to bury her feelings deep inside, just like he had. "I'll figure it out," Daniel said, his voice firm as if declaring a new merger strategy. "Where do I sign?" 2 hours and dozens of phone calls later, Daniel led Sophie to the car. Temporary guardianship paperwork was complete. His assistant, Linda, had worked like a magician behind the scenes, transforming the penthouse that was never meant for a child into a livable space for a little girl. As they approached the sleek Bentley, Sophie hesitated. 1 second of pause. "Is something wrong?" Daniel asked, eyes scanning her like searching for a system error. She looked up. A hard-to-name expression crossed her face, not fear, not excitement, but something delicate like morning dew, doubt and hope at once. Are you sure you want me?" The question came out softly, but it cut through his heart like a knife. Daniel froze. Then he knelt down, eye to eye with the girl. "Sophie," he whispered, carefully choosing his words as if writing a will. "I didn't know about you, until tonight. I've never been a father. I don't even know if I know how to be one." He paused. Took a breath. "But what I do know, is that I want you. And if you'll let me, we'll figure out how to do this. Together." A brief silence. Then a small smile broke across Sophie's face, the first one of the night, tiny, hesitant, but real. "Okay," she said simply, and climbed into the car. As Daniel drove the Bentley through the city's night streets, his hand gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. He was afraid. Truly afraid. But beneath that fear was something he had never quite felt before, a fierce determination, that the child with his eyes and Emily's heart would never, ever feel abandoned again. "Your room will be ready by tomorrow," Daniel promised, and then immediately realized, he had absolutely no idea what a child's room was supposed to look like. In his world, everything had a function, a desk for signing contracts, chairs for meetings, a bed for sleeping. But a child's room? It needed colors, memories, a bit of mess, and, most importantly, love, something he was still learning to remember. "Do you need help unpacking?" he asked, extending his hand a bit awkwardly, as if reaching out to something fragile. Sophie shook her head. "I don't have much." That sentence hung in the air between them, light as a breath but heavy as a stone. It was a testament to the vast difference between two lives that had just collided, a man who had everything, and a child who had almost nothing but a suitcase and the memory of a lost mother. Daniel cleared his throat, trying to dispel the lump of emotion forming like a cord in his throat. "Are you hungry?" Sophie shrugged. "A little." In the kitchen, which had never been used for anything other than display, Daniel opened the fridge. What did he see? A few bottles of expensive French wine, some neatly stacked takeout containers like books in a library, and a jar of Dijon mustard that was expired but still, classy. What do kids eat? He wondered, adorably bewildered. After a few minutes of examining food items as if reviewing investment contracts, he reached for his phone. "I'll order something. What do you like?" "Anything's fine," Sophie replied, then climbed onto a bar stool. Her tiny legs dangled and swung gently, not reaching the floor, as if she wasn't entirely sure she was allowed to touch this new life yet. They ate Thai food, pad Thai and mango salad, at the dining table that had never truly witnessed a family meal. This place had only ever hosted contract discussions or solitary dinners over business magazines. Daniel stole glances at Sophie. She carefully cut her food into small bites, her movements deliberate and surprisingly proper for an 8-year-old. "Did your mom teach you to eat like that?" he asked, instantly regretting bringing up Emily so suddenly, so carelessly. Sophie nodded. "Mom said good manners matter more than fancy things." A simple sentence, yet it pierced through Daniel's armored heart like a needle. Emily, always like that. To her, grace wasn't in starched tablecloths or perfectly chilled wine glasses, it was in eye contact, kind words, the choice to treat people with dignity. There was a brief silence between them, but no longer awkward, more like the quiet between two people slowly learning to row the same emotional boat. "Mr. Daniel?" Sophie spoke. "You can call me Daniel," he corrected quickly, then hesitated. "Or, whatever makes you comfortable." She looked at him, her blue eyes peering straight into his soul, the eyes of Emily, of himself, and now of a yet-to-be-written future. Daniel, she tried the name, slowly, like tasting a new dish. So is this, just for now, or, am I staying here? The question was unexpected, sharp, and surgical. In the whirlwind of the evening, Daniel hadn't yet thought that far ahead. But he heard himself say, with a voice as resolute as any boardroom speech. This is your home now, Sophie. As long as you want it to be. She didn't answer right away. Just nodded after a few thoughtful seconds. A small nod, but enough to melt the thin ice still separating them. That night, as Daniel stood in the doorway of the living room, quietly observing Sophie arranging her few belongings, a handful of clothes, a teddy bear with a torn ear, and a framed photo of Emily, he felt something tighten in his chest. For a man who had lived his life in spreadsheets and strategic plans, this was the first decision he had made without calculation. And it was the one that scared him the most. Daniel couldn't sleep. He lay in the overly large room, listening to the ticking clock like the heartbeat of a soul waiting for something. Memories surged, Sophie's eyes, the tiny letter, the birth certificate. He got up and walked into his office, filled with awards, degrees, photos of global conferences, but nothing with Emily's name on it. Except for one old box, locked away in the bottom drawer. He hesitated. Then opened it. Inside were fragments of a love that had once burned brightly, concert tickets from a show they saw together, a few handwritten notes, and a watercolor sketch Emily had painted of him smiling, something so rare that even he couldn't believe it. Daniel lifted the photo. Emily on a beach, her blonde hair flying in the wind, her smile sparkling like early summer sunlight. You should have told me, he whispered to the picture, his voice hoarse. Emotion surged like a rising tide, anger, sorrow, and something like repentance. She was alone for 9 days, he said, eyes still fixed on her face. 9 days. His memory brought him back to their last argument, the upscale apartment, words thrown like knives. You have to choose, Daniel, Emily had said, her eyes red, her voice trembling. Your empire, or a life with me. He had chosen. Without hesitation. And lost everything. Whitmore Global Holdings had been in its golden phase, no room for distraction, no space for emotion. When he turned back, she was gone. And his pride, once his crown, had kept him from taking that one small step to keep her. Now, 9 years later, he finally understood the true cost of that choice, higher than any equity, higher than any deal in his lifetime. A gentle sound like wind slipping through a crack in the door pulled Daniel from the spiral of memories in his mind. He turned around and saw Sophie standing at the doorway, her big round eyes looking at him timidly. She was wearing an oversized pair of pajamas, clearly something someone on his staff had hastily bought while trying to guess the size of an 8-year-old. The shirt nearly reached her knees, the sleeves hung loosely, making her look like a tiny knight donning a cloak before battle. And that golden hair, soft, slightly tousled from restless sleep, looked exactly like Emily's. I'm sorry, Sophie said quickly, her voice small like a falling leaf. I heard a noise. Daniel hurriedly closed the box, as if afraid that one more glance into the past would shatter him. It's okay, he said gently. Can't sleep. She shook her head, her eyes drifting to the photo still in his hand. That's Mom. Yes, Daniel whispered. That's your mom, from a long time ago. Sophie stepped into the room, her footsteps tentative as if testing the ground before stepping. She wasn't sure if she was allowed in this private space, a room filled with the aura of success, masculinity, and power, but cold like a museum. She sat carefully on the leather sofa, as if afraid she might tear its polished surface. I also keep a picture of you by my bed, she said. Daniel felt his chest tighten as though someone was squeezing his heart. Such a small, simple act, yet filled with so much unspoken meaning. My mom, said you had important things to do. That you were building something really big, Sophie said, her tiny fingers tracing the seams of the sofa. But she also said, "I had your eyes." Daniel looked closely at his daughter's face. Emily's features were clear, the delicate nose, the small chin, the softly curved forehead. But those eyes, that deep blue, were his. Eyes that once looked at life like a battlefield, at competitors like prey. Now, they reflected him back, through the form of a child, innocent yet wise. Did she talk about me often?" Daniel asked, caught between hope and fear. Sophie shrugged. "Sometimes. Especially when I asked." "She wasn't mad at you, if that's what you're thinking." Daniel blinked. He hadn't expected that answer, let alone that forgiveness. Emily had every reason to be angry, to hate, to cut ties. But she hadn't. She'd kept a piece of him alive in their daughter's life. In Sophie's heart. She once said, "One day, when you were ready, you'd be a good dad." Those words hit him hard, not from an adversary, but from someone who had loved him. If only Emily had known her end was near. If only she had somehow planned this meeting, sent Sophie as a messenger, delivering a second chance. "It's late," he said softly, his voice thick with rising emotion. "You should try to get a little more sleep." Sophie nodded and stepped off the sofa, her tiny feet brushing the cold wooden floor. At the door, she stopped and turned back. "Daniel?" "Yes. I'm glad I found you." She walked away, leaving Daniel motionless. In his hand still was the old photo of Emily, her smile radiant, as if she were smiling at the whole world. For a man who once prided himself on never missing a business opportunity, this, right here, was the one he'd missed most. Being with Emily, and their daughter. Tomorrow, would be different. He promised himself. The next morning, Daniel Whitmore, the man who had once acquired a billion-dollar industrial conglomerate, stood in his kitchen, staring into the fridge as if expecting it to cook breakfast for him. He had never felt so helpless in front of a stainless steel door. "Do you have cereal?" Sophie's voice broke the silence beside him. She wore the same clothes from the day before, her hair in a crooked ponytail, like a pencil sketch from a vintage storybook. Daniel shut the fridge, trying to make it look like a deliberate decision. "I don't think so. I usually just have coffee." Sophie nodded seriously, like a tiny CEO confirming something important about a business partner. "Mom said, you can't think straight if you don't eat breakfast." That sentence, simple and pure like the ring of a silver bell, made Daniel pause. Emily once again slipped into the smallest moments of the day, and he whispered, she was right. "Let's go out for breakfast," he said, regaining his gentle tone. "Then we'll shop for some things you need." An hour later, they stood in the children's clothing section of a luxury department store, a place Daniel hadn't set foot in for 15 years. The racks of colorful clothes looked like another world, one without contracts or profit margins, just cotton, lace, kittens, and superheroes. "Pick anything you like," Daniel said, with a casual wave like a king granting his realm. Sophie hesitated. "Anything?" "Of course." She bit her lip, walking slowly among the racks. Her small fingers gently touched sleeves and collars, pausing at a pretty floral dress before pulling away, as if afraid of being punished for dreaming too much. Daniel finally understood. He knelt down to her eye level, his voice low and tender. "Sophie, you don't have to worry about the price." She stood still, a bit embarrassed. "Mom always said to check the price before buying. To calculate. To save." Once again, a gentle cut pierced Daniel's heart. While he had been accumulating wealth, Emily had been teaching their daughter values, caution, responsibility, things far more valuable than digits in a bank account. "That's really good advice," Daniel said, smiling. "But today is different. Today, it's about what's needed, not what's luxurious." Sophie began choosing items slowly, as if strolling through a museum of possibilities that had never belonged to her. She touched each item, dresses, books, school supplies, with the cautious eyes of someone who had never been allowed to want. Her choices were not extravagant, not frivolous, they were practical, tidy, and mostly, necessary rather than dreamy. Each time she added something to the cart, her eyes would glance toward Daniel, as if seeking permission, as if a single frown from him would make her return everything. Finally, Daniel paused, knelt down to her level, and spoke in a voice both gentle and firm. "You don't have to ask every time. If you like it, just take it." She gave a small nod, but that nod seemed to untie a knot inside Daniel, one he hadn't even known existed. They continued through other sections of the store, and Daniel increasingly felt like a tourist in a foreign land. What did children need beyond clothes? Apparently, a lot more: school supplies, children's books, educational toys, stuffed animals, building blocks, things he, a man once consumed by market analysis, had never considered. His assistant had arranged for a suitable bed to be delivered to the penthouse, but what about the rest? What about space? A sense of belonging? The small details that make up an entire childhood? All these thoughts were interrupted when Sophie suddenly stopped. Her eyes sparkled like two sapphires as she stared at an art kit, paintbrushes, watercolors, and a mini easel, all neatly arranged as if calling her name. "You like to draw?" Daniel asked, though her gaze had already answered for her. She nodded. "Mom taught me," she said. "Putting feelings on paper is easier when saying them out loud is too hard." That line rang like a bell in the deepest corners of Daniel's mind. He didn't hesitate, the art kit was in the cart immediately. "You got that from your mother," he said, eyes slightly misty. "She was very talented." Sophie gave a soft smile. "I know. Sometimes she sold paintings, when money was tight." Every piece of information Sophie shared was like a tiny raindrop soaking into the parched soil of Daniel's heart. For years, he had lived in abundance, of wealth, of success, but had lacked one essential thing: presence in the life of someone he once loved. Back at the penthouse, Daniel watched Sophie with the attentiveness of a craftsman observing an apprentice build their own little world. She hung up her clothes neatly, sorted books by height, and placed her art supplies by the window, where the morning light would hit, just like Emily used to do. "Is this okay?" she asked, pointing to a corner of the room, the space she had quietly claimed as her own in a home that had once felt too pristine to belong to anyone. Daniel looked around. Purple bedding, soft blue dots, a kid-style lamp, colorful boxes, it all brightened a room originally designed to impress, not to love. "It's perfect," he said honestly, then smiled warmly. "It makes this place feel like a home." Sophie smiled, a cautious, testing smile, but one that lit up her entire face. And in that moment, Daniel realized, while he might be providing a home for her, she was filling a space inside him he hadn't even known was empty. 3 days later, a subtle routine began to form between them. Daniel, once incapable of tolerating any disruption to his schedule, started rearranging his work calendar completely. He delayed business trips, delegated meetings, and, unthinkable to his executive team, postponed early morning briefings to make toast. The press had yet to discover Sophie's existence, and Daniel intended to keep it that way for as long as possible. Each morning, Daniel woke early, answered urgent emails, and brewed a cup of coffee. Then he made a simple breakfast: toast, eggs, orange juice, something he had never done before, but now felt just right. They ate in silence, but it was no longer the awkward kind. It was the comfortable quiet of two people learning to orbit one another, like two planets finding their gravitational pull. One morning, while Sophie pushed her eggs around her plate, Daniel spoke. "I need to get you enrolled in school." She only shrugged. "I like school. But, sometimes kids ask a lot when someone's different." Daniel understood instantly. The questions about her mom. The orphanage. And now, about the father who had suddenly appeared after 8 long years. "We'll find a good place," he said. "Somewhere you feel safe. Comfortable." A fresh start. That evening, while Daniel was reviewing documents in his study, a cry tore through the quiet. "Mommy! Don't go!" His heart clenched. He leapt from his chair and ran to Sophie's room. She was thrashing in her sleep, tears streaking her flushed cheeks. He froze, not from fear, but from helplessness. All his business skills were useless now. No spreadsheet could tell him what to do. "Sophie," he called softly, stepping to her bedside. "It's just a dream, sweetheart." Her eyes opened, dazed, confused. She looked at him, unsure of where she was, or who he was. Then reality returned, heavy and somber. I'm sorry," she whispered, wiping her tears with her tiny fist. "Don't be," Daniel said, sitting awkwardly on the edge of the bed. "Nightmares are normal." She nodded, hugging her knees to her chest. Daniel hesitated, then reached out and gently took her small hand. He was surprised when she didn't pull away. She held onto his hand like an anchor in a stormy sea of memories and grief. They sat in silence like that, a CEO once capable of shaking markets with a single decision, now reduced to holding his daughter's hand, until her breathing softened and the fear in her shoulders melted away. "Do you want some water?" he whispered. She shook her head. "Can I stay a little longer?" And so Daniel Whitmore, Chief Executive Officer of a global corporation, sat holding his daughter's hand in silence until she fell asleep again. In that moment, every client call, every revenue forecast, every pressure from the business world, disappeared. Only one thing remained. Fatherhood. The next morning, Daniel discovered something unfamiliar on his desk, not a file folder, not a financial forecast, nor a contract awaiting signature. It was a drawing. A portrait, drawn with colored pencils, lacking precise anatomical proportions but unmistakably him. The stern forehead, slightly crooked tie, slightly protruding ears, and especially the eyes, colored with the brightest blue in the box. In the bottom corner of the drawing, a scrawled note in purple ink, "Thank you for staying." Daniel picked up the drawing, the morning light slanting through the window bringing the lines to life. A lump formed in his throat. Sophie, that little girl, had captured his sternness, yet somehow infused the eyes with a gentleness he hadn't seen in his own reflection for years. He wondered, is that how she sees me, or how she hopes I will become? Without a word, Daniel took an empty frame once used to display a Businessman of the Year certificate, placed the drawing inside, and respectfully set it in the center of his desk. This was the first, and truly only, personal item ever present in that austere space. That afternoon, during a brief meeting, his assistant Linda Morgan, always more observant than any of Daniel's risk management software, walked in. "New artwork?" she asked with a sly smile, glancing at the portrait on the desk. Daniel looked at it, then replied in a deep yet gentle voice, "Not art, something priceless." Her response was a moment of stunned silence. Rarely had she heard her boss speak of anything beyond monetary value. That evening, for the first time since Sophie's arrival, Daniel laughed, a genuine laugh, not for diplomacy, not for negotiation, but as he listened to his daughter describe an eccentric character in the book she was reading. A small connection had formed between them, as delicate as the first spider silk spun in the wind, yet, still real. Neither of them knew, couldn't know, that this fragile thread would become the foundation for a profound change in their lives. And then, the protective bubble Daniel had tried to create for this new life burst on Tuesday morning. His phone buzzed incessantly, messages, calls, urgent alerts from the PR director. "Call immediately. The incident has been exposed." Daniel's stomach sank as if he had just lost billions in a market crash. He knew this moment would come. He had only hoped for more time. A few more weeks for Sophie to adjust. A few more days for him to understand what he was doing. "Mr. Daniel," the PR director's voice was urgent over the phone. "The Daily Chronicle will publish the article tomorrow morning. They have photos of you and Sophie at the department store. The headline is, The billionaire's secret child. Daniel remained silent, his eyes turning toward Sophie's room, where she was preparing for her first day at Ridgeview Academy, the prestigious private school where he hoped she would find stability. No comment. No confirmation. "I'll handle this myself," he said curtly, then hung up. When Sophie appeared, wearing the navy blue blazer of Ridgeview's uniform, pleated skirt, and a small badge pinned to her chest, Daniel felt a surge of emotion, protectiveness, responsibility, and pride. "You look formal," he said, attempting a touch of humor. She tugged at the collar as if suffocating in the fabric. "Is it okay if I'm scared?" That question, simple, honest, unguarded, left Daniel speechless. In his world, fear was a weakness. Something not allowed in the boardroom, let alone in expression. "Of course it's okay," he replied, bending down. "Every new beginning is a little scary." On the way to school, Daniel wrestled internally. Should he tell Sophie about the article? Should he prepare her mentally? Or remain silent so she could focus on her first day? Finally, he spoke. "Sophie. There might be some attention directed at us." She looked up, frowning. "Attention?" "Yes. Some newspapers, sometimes they write about me, about work, about personal life." Understanding gradually appeared in Sophie's eyes, a remarkable maturity. "Because you're wealthy?" she asked. Daniel smiled slightly. "Not exactly. Because you're important." When they arrived at school, Sophie was greeted by the principal, who immediately recognized Daniel's identity. Her posture straightened, her smile slightly forced, but still polite. "We're very pleased to welcome Sophie," she said. "Our student ambassador will give her a tour." A lively girl with bright eyes approached. "Hi. I'm Emma Johnson. I think we're in the same class." Sophie hesitated for a second, then unexpectedly wrapped her arms around Daniel's waist, a brief, awkward hug, but unmistakable. "Goodbye," she whispered, then walked away with Emma. Daniel stood still. It was the first hug, fragile, clumsy, but he knew it was a beginning. By afternoon, the media storm had officially erupted. The security team reported photographers tailing the apartment and company headquarters. Phones rang incessantly. Board members expressed concern. Investors began to wonder about the CEO's focus. When Daniel picked up Sophie, she quietly climbed into the car, saying nothing. "How was your first day?" he asked gently. She looked out the window for a moment, then softly said. Emma asked, "If it's true that you didn't want me until Mom died?" Daniel gripped the steering wheel tightly. His heart felt as if someone had squeezed it. "What did you say?" "I said I didn't know." Silence filled the car. "Is that true?" Sophie asked, her voice light but cutting like a paper blade. Daniel took a deep breath. He looked at his daughter, truly looked, then slowly said. "I didn't know about you, Sophie. I didn't know you existed. If I had known, everything would have been different." She said nothing, but her lips pressed together. "But, now I know," he continued, his voice low but firm. "And I'm glad. Very glad you're here." Not a perfect answer. But the truth. And in a world where everything is painted to look beautiful, perhaps, that truth was what they both needed most. Daniel sat alone in the vast office, the dim light from the desk lamp casting a soft shadow over Sophie's drawing, still neatly placed on the table like a gentle reminder. In front of him was a thick file, bound in deep brown leather, as if it too knew how important it was. The acquisition proposal in Singapore. A deal that could solidify Whitmore Global Holdings as an undeniable force in the international financial world. Global expansion, record-breaking profit margins, and, not least of all, the chairman of the board seat Daniel had pursued for years like a dream wrapped in genuine leather. He flipped through the pages, cold lines about strategy, capital investment, transition timelines, all precise, coherent. And then he stopped at a small detail that weighed heavily on his heart. Minimum 3 weeks of personal presence required in Singapore. 3 weeks, it sounded trivial in the world of CEOs, but for Daniel now, 3 weeks was a universe apart from the golden-haired dreamer slowly learning to trust her father. Linda Morgan, his longtime assistant, who had witnessed Daniel negotiate with the world's largest corporations, appeared in the doorway, file in hand. "The board is waiting in the conference room, sir." Daniel nodded, adjusting his tie in the mirror. But instead of asking about the Singapore partners as usual, he asked something else, which made Linda pause briefly. "Did the school call today?" Linda blinked, then flipped through notes on her tablet. "Nothing urgent." "Oh, but Sophie's art exhibition is still scheduled for next Friday." Daniel frowned. "Art exhibition?" She nodded. "She told me the other day. One of her paintings was selected for display." He vaguely remembered, there was a time, during breakfast, between a bite of toast and a furtive glance at his phone schedule, when she'd said, almost in passing, "My painting got selected." She hadn't asked if he would come. Hadn't dared name the date or time. It was the way smart children protect themselves from disappointment too familiar. "Keep it on the calendar," Daniel said, his voice more certain than he expected. In the boardroom, 12 faces awaited him, faces Daniel had grown accustomed to seeing nod at every bold strategy he delivered. These were people who only knew Daniel Whitmore, the unrelenting leader, the man who prioritized results over people, and who certainly had no such thing as personal considerations in his vocabulary. Daniel stepped forward, presenting everything: charts, merger timelines, financial forecasts, like a symphony he had played 1,000 times. But part of his mind drifted, somewhere in a small classroom, where an 8-year-old girl was mixing colors with her mother's soul. The CFO delivered the final point. "To ensure a smooth transition phase, we'll need you in Singapore starting Monday, for at least 3 weeks." Daniel paused. Monday. The art exhibition on Friday. Technically, he could still attend and fly out right after. But the question wasn't what he could do, it was what he should do. Who would take care of Sophie during those 3 weeks? More importantly, what message was he sending if he left so soon after saying he would be there for her? The chairman's voice cut into his thoughts. "That timeline, is it acceptable?" The old Daniel would have nodded instantly. Work came first. There was no room for feelings. "But today," he slowly said, "I need 24 hours. There are some personal considerations I need to address first." A wave of confusion spread across the faces in the room. Personal considerations. That phrase had never once come out of Daniel Whitmore's mouth. That evening, he found Sophie at the dining table. Notebook open in front of her, pencil in hand, her hair tied up loosely. "How was school today?" Daniel asked, setting down his briefcase and loosening his tie. "Good. We had a science quiz. I got an A." "Excellent," he smiled gently. "Sophie," he sat down beside her, "I need to talk to you about something." She put her pencil down, her expression shifting to cautious alertness, a look Daniel had seen in executives about to enter tough negotiations. "There's an important project in Singapore, planned before you arrived. You have to go," she finished for him, voice even, careful like an adult. 3 weeks, he exhaled, trying to read her small face. She nodded, turned back to her homework. "All right. Linda Morgan will stay, or we can arrange someone." "It's okay," she interrupted. "I understand." The quickness of her answer hurt more than any tantrum would have. It was resignation, a reflex of a child too used to adults leaving for things more important. "I've marked your art exhibition on my calendar," Daniel said quietly. Sophie looked up. A flicker of genuine surprise crossed her face, then disappeared, replaced by calm composure. "You don't have to come. It's not a big deal." It is to me, Daniel replied, not taking his eyes off her. A long silence followed, but not the kind born of distance. It was the kind that comes when something is slowly forming, hope. It flickered in Sophie's eyes, before experience dimmed it again. She shrugged and returned to her numbers. But this time, her pencil strokes were just a little softer. That night, Daniel stood by the large window in his home office, where a part of New York City glittered beneath him like a living map of power and ambition. The skyscrapers rose proudly, the bright lights dancing like financial numbers in his mind, but for the first time in years, he felt no inspiration from them. All he saw were cold glass panes, windows with no one waiting behind them, offices where the lights never turned off, just like his life over the past 2 decades. Daniel Whitmore, the man from 2 weeks ago, would never have questioned his path. That path had been straight, unobstructed, emotionless. A runway for success planes to take off. But that man had never held his daughter's hand after a nightmare. That man had never heard his daughter's trembling voice asking if he was any different from those who had left her. He turned back to his desk. The computer screen was still on, the financial spreadsheet for the Singapore deal open, numbers blurring under his tired eyes. The documents flickered past, his mind trying to focus, but part of him drifted through overlapping fragments of memory, Sophie's hesitant hug, the midnight cry for "Mom," the hopeful look that had dimmed too quickly. For days, Daniel lived a double life. By day, a sharp, cold, authoritative businessman. By night, a clumsy father stumbling through a world of emotions for which he had never been trained. That delicate balance collapsed at 9:47 p.m., during a critical video call with Singaporean investors. Mr. Daniel, regarding the regulatory terms in Section 12, the investor's voice echoed in the quiet room. Daniel sat upright, fingers poised on the keyboard to respond, when a piercing scream echoed from the end of the hallway. He froze. A cry, pained, broken, tearing through the steel walls of his mind. "Sophie. Excuse me a moment," he said urgently, muting the mic without waiting for a reply. He ran toward her room, each step sinking with his tightening heartbeat. Sophie was upright in bed, face pale, tears streaming, clutching a pillow tightly. "Mom," she was there, then gone, and I couldn't find her again, she sobbed, voice crumbling. Daniel sat beside her, his hand awkwardly resting on her shoulder, a gesture more unfamiliar than any tech jargon in his investment reports. "It was just a dream, sweetheart. You're safe now." Meanwhile, his headset vibrated non-stop. Messages. Calls. Reminders. On one side, a billion-dollar deal. On the other, a child desperately clinging to emotional shards with all the courage she had. He stood up, hesitating. "I need to finish a meeting. Try to get some sleep, okay? We'll talk in the morning." Sophie's face fell like a building losing its foundation. But she only nodded. "I'm sorry for bothering you." "It's okay," Daniel replied, his eyes already on the phone. "Just, please stay in bed this time." The moment the words left his mouth, he knew he had made a mistake. A mistake bigger than any strategic blunder he had ever made. Sophie shrank back. That fleeting softness vanished like morning mist under sunlight, replaced by a quiet coldness Daniel recognized instantly, because it was how he had taught himself to survive. "I will," she whispered, pulling the blanket over herself, turning away. Daniel returned to the meeting, continued talking terms and strategies, and when the screen displayed "preliminary agreement reached," he should have been thrilled. But all he felt was emptiness. And his daughter's face, cold, distant, haunted him like a silent verdict. The following days passed in a silent, unmistakable shift. Sophie remained polite, gave appropriate answers, but no longer shared. No more school stories. No more showing her drawings. She had become a quiet stranger again, living with Daniel in a large, sterile space. When the child welfare officer, Mrs. Ramirez, arrived for her scheduled visit, Daniel was caught off guard. "We just want to ensure Sophie is adjusting well," she said, placing her briefcase on the table like a punctuation mark on an unfinished sentence. Of course, Daniel nodded, for the first time feeling genuine anxiety, a sensation not even shareholder meetings had stirred in him. Sophie was asked to speak privately. Daniel sat in his office, pretending to check emails while straining to hear muffled voices from the living room. When Mrs. Ramirez returned, her face remained professional, but her tone had turned serious. Sophie seems withdrawn. When I asked if she felt comfortable here, she couldn't give a clear answer. Daniel felt a knot in his stomach. She's adjusting. We both are. I understand, she replied. But children need stability. And emotional availability from their primary caregiver. I'm concerned, with your upcoming travel schedule, Sophie may perceive this as another abandonment, especially after losing her mother. That sentence hit like a slap. Daniel had never thought of his business trip as a loss for Sophie. To him, it was necessity. But to her, it could be another goodbye, no different from death. I'll video call her every day, he said, like a man patching a fire with tape. Mrs. Ramirez jotted that down, unreadable. Mr. Daniel, she said gently but firmly, being a parent isn't just about rearranging schedules. Sometimes, the right business decision isn't the right parenting one. After she left, Daniel didn't return to work. Instead, he stood in the hallway, leaning against the wall, listening to the silence from Sophie's room. No talking. No laughter. No scraping chairs. Only silence, heavy as smoke, as nameless sorrow. And for the first time in his illustrious career, Daniel Whitmore asked himself, can success come at the cost of a child's heart? And was he about to make the same old mistake again? My name is Sophie Adams. At least, until last week. When Mr. Daniel Whitmore, told me that, if I wanted to, I could take his last name. I nodded. But then I said, I'll think about it. I think Mom would understand if I changed it. She used to say that, even after everything that happened, he was still my father. And sometimes, that alone is enough to start over. I still hide my special drawing under my pillow. It's a picture I worked on for 3 nights straight, after the lights went out and everything sank into quiet. In the picture, Daniel and I stand side by side, holding hands, in front of the big glass building where we now live. The building looks cold, but I drew sunlight spilling over it, and I tried to make Daniel smile. I drew carefully. Tried to get all the proportions right, but left just a little space for hope. I'm scared to show it to him. Not because I think he'll hate it, but because I'm afraid he'll say he likes it just because he feels like he should. Not because he means it. Ms. Bennett, my art teacher, says I have talent. Like your mother, she said, when I finished the piece for the exhibit, A Lone Lighthouse on a Cliff. There's incredible depth for someone your age. I just smiled. But I didn't tell her I know all about depth. When you watch someone you love slowly slip away from the world, day by day, until they're just a whisper of breath, and then silence. You learn about the deepest places in the soul. Places with no light. No words can reach them. I wonder if Daniel will leave. Not like Mom, not because of illness, but still, leave, in his own way. Maybe a flight. A meeting. A decision that pulls him back into the world of busy grown-ups. Sometimes, he tries, like when he makes breakfast, burnt, but still sweet, or asks about school, though his eyes are sometimes somewhere else. But then, the phone rings. And I watch him disappear again. Not in body, but in his eyes. That night, when I woke up from a nightmare and called for him, I saw something in his eyes that scared me. Not fear of being scolded. But fear that I'm a problem he doesn't know how to solve. A problem he never studied for. Today at school, Emma Johnson, the bright-eyed girl with brown hair who always buzzes like soda, asked me, "Is having a billionaire dad awesome?" I just shrugged. How do you explain that you trade all the watches, fancy cars, penthouses, and five-star breakfasts, just to have a dad who really wants to be with you. When the welfare worker, Ms. Ramirez, came and asked if I was happy, I didn't know what to say. There are moments when I think, maybe this could work. Like when Daniel reads to me, awkward but kind. Or when I found out he framed my drawing of him. But then I remember what Mom used to say. That Daniel loved his work more than anything. And I see how he looks at his phone when it rings. Like real life starts when I'm no longer there. The Singapore trip scares me. Ms. Linda Morgan is nice. But she's not family. I'm scared that after 3 weeks, Daniel will realize life is easier without me messing things up. Mom used to say, don't expect too much from Daniel. He has his own path. But sometimes, late at night, I still imagine that he might choose to make me part of that path. Not out of duty, but because he wants to. Yesterday, I overheard him arguing on the phone about the trip. The timeline is a problem, he said. I stood by the stairs, heart thumping. Was the timeline me? Am I throwing off his perfect plans just by existing? I practice being no trouble. I keep my room clean, do my homework, stay quiet. I try to be invisible and visible at the same time, a balance that's exhausting. The art exhibit is on Friday. I haven't told him how important it is. Because I'm afraid to hope. Mom never missed a single exhibit. Even when she had to come in a wheelchair, she came. She smiled. She held my hand. I tell myself not to expect anything. But a small part, a very small part, of me still wonders. What if he chooses me instead of work? Just this once. Last night, I took the drawing out from under my pillow and added more details. I drew a tiny smile on his face. Drew sunlight shining on both of us. Warm light, like Mom used to say, where there is love, there is light. Ms. Bennett says, art lets us create the world we want to see. I'm not sure if that's true. But I still draw. Mom used to say, love isn't just a feeling. It's a choice, every day. I wonder if Daniel knows that. Meanwhile, in a skyscraper far above, inside Whitmore Tower, Daniel stands in the boardroom. Around him, suits tailored to perfection, eyes full of expectation. The flight to Singapore is booked for Saturday morning. The contracts are prepared. Everything going exactly to plan. The board called an emergency meeting. Because they all want to be sure that Whitmore doesn't let emotion interfere. Doesn't let a child interfere. Daniel stares at the words on the document. Mandatory in-person presence in Asia from the 7th to the 28th. And somewhere else, in a little room full of sketches, a little girl is adjusting the rays of the sun in her drawing. Hoping that the father who's never chosen her will choose her this time. Chairman of the board, Mr. Richard Ellison, opened the meeting with a voice calm yet commanding, like a bell ringing through a grand cathedral, resonant, clear, allowing no room for rebuttal. We need to discuss the progress of the Singapore acquisition. Daniel sat up straight. He had anticipated this moment, even prepared a brief speech in his head to defend the decision to delay his flight by a few days to attend Sophie's art exhibition. A minor adjustment, as he saw it. However, when Walter, one of the board's most seasoned members, leaned forward, his voice heavy like a whetstone, Daniel realized, today would not be a gentle conversation. Some members of the board, Walter said, have expressed concern over your commitment to the Singapore deal, especially in light of recent personal developments. The room fell silent, tight as a drawn bowstring. Everyone knew about Sophie. The story had made Forbes' front page and was featured in Bloomberg's news segment under a headline that read, "Billionaire unexpectedly becomes father to 8-year-old girl, is Whitmore Global at risk?" Daniel drew a deep breath, then replied in his usual composed and courteous tone. "My commitment to Whitmore Global Holdings remains unchanged. Adjusting the schedule by a few days won't affect the long-term strategy." Philip Grant, the toughest member of the board, raised an eyebrow and leaned in. With all due respect, Daniel, this company wasn't built on a few adjustments. It was built on absolute dedication, something you've always embodied, until now. Those words struck like a velvet-wrapped arrow, aimed at Daniel's pride. They weren't wrong. Daniel Whitmore was the man who had sacrificed everything, sleep, friends, relationships, to build this corporate empire. The men in this room had witnessed that journey. And they expected nothing less than unwavering devotion. Daniel clenched his fists. "What are you saying, Richard?" Walter stepped in, no longer subtle. "We need you to clarify your priorities. Either fully commit to the deal, which means flying to Singapore tomorrow and staying for 3 weeks. Or, if personal matters require more of your time, you may consider stepping back temporarily from executive duties." A gentle phrase. A velvet-wrapped ultimatum. Prove your loyalty. Or lose your power. Daniel was about to speak when his phone buzzed softly. The screen read, "Sophie's school, urgent call." He had never answered a phone call during a board meeting. But today, something primal, fatherly instinct, a term he hadn't yet mastered, made him excuse himself from the room. "Mr. Daniel," the counselor's voice came through, polite yet tinged with worry. "There's been an incident with Sophie." Daniel's heart sank. In class today, the students were working on a family tree project. When another student asked why Sophie had only drawn herself and her mother, some thoughtless comments were made, about the absent father. "She's very upset and keeps asking for you." Daniel didn't wait to hear more. "I'm coming now." When he returned to the boardroom to grab his coat, Richard looked at him with narrowed suspicion. "This is exactly what we were afraid of." Daniel paused at the doorway. A brief hesitation. But then, his voice rang out, calm but resolute. "This meeting is adjourned. I'll have my decision for you in 30 minutes. And he left, leaving behind a cold room filled with charts and power plays, to reach a small room where an 8-year-old girl sat curled up, hugging her knees, eyes red from crying. Sophie sat motionless on the bench, her small frame blending into the furniture. Daniel knelt, placing a hand on the side of the seat. "What happened, sweetheart?" The counselor explained. Daniel couldn't imagine that pain. The questions from classmates. The casual yet cutting comments, reminders that Sophie wasn't like the other children. No father for most of her life. And her mother, now gone. "Can we go home?" Sophie whispered. Daniel looked into her eyes. Home wasn't the luxury penthouse with a glass ceiling. It was the place where someone listened, where love lived, where presence mattered. "Of course," he said. On the way home, the car was silent. Streetlights passed across the window like timelines running in reverse. Sophie spoke. "Did I make you mad? For making you leave your work?" Daniel turned, surprised. "No, of course not. Because Mom used to say, for you, work was the most important thing." The words cut deep. Because they were true, every word, for nearly his whole life. "Things change, Sophie," he murmured. "People change." When they got home, Daniel didn't head straight to his desk. He went to the kitchen. Opened the cupboard. Took out cocoa, milk, and a little whipped cream. The hot chocolate his mother used to make when he was a boy, on rainy days, or days when the world seemed to fall apart. The two of them sat at the kitchen counter, each holding a warm mug, the steam weaving through the invisible space between them. "I didn't know what to draw in the family tree," Sophie said softly. "The other kids had grandparents, siblings, pets. I only had Mom." A pause. "And now?" she asked gently. Daniel placed his hand over hers. "Now, you have me." She looked up, those deep blue eyes, so much like his, gazing straight into him. "For how long?" That question tore through every defense, every business language he'd ever used. This was the most important negotiation of his life. As long as you need me, Daniel answered. Always. Even if it means missing the biggest deals of my career. Daniel sat in silence, the light from his desk lamp casting a glow onto the small drawing, Sophie's portrait of him, framed in simple wood yet containing an entire new world. He looked at it for a long time. Not the way an investor studies a growth chart, but the way a father sees himself, not as a CEO, not as a symbol, but simply as a man drawn from the heart. His phone buzzed non-stop. The board. Investors. The team in Singapore. Familiar names demanding commitment, demanding answers, demanding the man he used to be, the one who knew how to satisfy everyone, except his own family. Linda Morgan stepped in. She didn't knock, for the first time in their 7 years of working together. The board is waiting for your decision in the morning, she said, her voice soft but with something different in it. Daniel looked up. His eyes no longer tense like they used to be. I know, he replied. Linda hesitated, then spoke, not as an assistant this time, but as a friend. I've worked with you for 7 years, Daniel. I've never seen you hesitate over a business decision. Daniel offered a faint smile. I've never had a daughter before. Linda paused, then gave a quiet nod. With what it's bringing out of you, I think you're doing the right thing. Whatever that is. After she left, Daniel picked up the phone and dialed Walter, the strict chairman he'd long viewed as a silent rival. When Walter answered, Daniel spoke in a warm, steady tone, one without a single question mark. I'll be attending my daughter's art exhibition on Friday. After that, I'll join the Singapore team via video conference. My physical presence isn't required for this deal to succeed. And you know that. On the other end, there was heavy silence. The kind Daniel knew well, before a storm or after something deeply honest has been spoken. The board won't be pleased, Walter said slowly. They can vote me out, Daniel replied, strangely calm. But I suspect shareholders would rather support a CEO who adapts in the face of challenge, than one who avoids it. With a quiet tap of the end call button, Daniel felt he had done something he had never dared to do, choose right over easy. Tomorrow might bring consequences. But tonight, Daniel Whitmore knew he had passed the first true test of fatherhood. Later that night, Daniel stood at Sophie's door. The soft glow of her night lamp cast shadows across her face as she carefully arranged her paintbrushes and bottles of paint. Her small hands moved with precision, by size and order, just like Daniel had arranged his business deals. Ready for tomorrow? He asked, his voice gentler than usual. Sophie looked up, her eyes filled with both hope and hesitation, like someone who had learned not to expect too much. I think so. Ms. Bennett said my painting is one of the best in the class. Daniel stepped into the room and sat on the edge of the bed. He noticed the subtle changes, portrait sketches on the wall, children's books cluttered on the nightstand, a stuffed bear teetering between the pillows. The room that was once lifeless, now bore the marks of a child. And of love. I know about the meeting, Sophie suddenly said. Daniel blinked. I heard you talking to Ms. Linda. They might be really mad, right? They might, he sighed. They might be very mad. But they won't fire me. Because you matter too much. And because, you found another way? Sophie asked, eyes wide, full of cautious hope. Exactly. A compromise. Sophie turned back to her color pencils, but Daniel sensed something still unsettled in her. What are you thinking? He asked, leaning closer. She hesitated, then reached under her pillow and pulled out a neatly folded piece of paper. I made this, but I wasn't sure if you'd want it. Daniel unfolded it. And his heart clenched. It was a drawing. He and Sophie, holding hands, standing in front of the tall glass building. Above them, the sun blazed. His face wore a small smile, but it was clearly a happy one. Perfect, he whispered, eyes fixed on the picture. Sophie smiled, for the first time, a smile that reached the depths of her blue eyes. Really? Really? That night, Daniel did something he had never done before, left work early. And instead of a meeting with analysts, he took his daughter out for ice cream at the park, a place with peeling wooden benches, joggers, dog walkers, and fathers holding their children's hands. They sat side by side. Sophie licked a chocolate cone. Daniel chose vanilla, safe, low risk, just like his life before Sophie. Is it because your father was too strict that you work so much? Sophie asked bluntly. Daniel nearly choked on his ice cream. Partly, maybe, he answered. Because you had to prove something, right? Yeah, to the point where I forgot when I'd finally be good enough. Sophie nodded. Mom said maybe, you were lonely in your big tower. Daniel paused. Not because he was shocked, but because it was so true. She looked up at him, those bright blue eyes shining with wisdom far beyond her age. She wasn't angry with you. She just said, maybe you hadn't figured out what really matters yet. Daniel looked at Sophie, for a long time. This 8-year-old girl, with Emily's face, uncanny maturity, and a heart big enough to offer him a second chance. She was right, Daniel said softly. I was lonely. I just didn't know it. That night, in the penthouse once hailed as a lonely fortress of success, Daniel quietly took Sophie's drawing off his desk, where it had rested like a private treasure, and moved it to the center of the living room wall. As soon as anyone stepped inside, they would see it. Not for display, but as a declaration. That this place, once a shrine for multimillion-dollar meetings, had become a home. And that drawing, him and Sophie holding hands beneath the sun, was not just a child's artwork. It was a promise. A marker of a new identity. A father, no longer hiding from his role. The next morning, Linda Morgan arrived, arms full with a thick stack of documents, papers requiring signatures for the Singapore deal. Her high heels echoed on the hardwood floor as if still carrying the weight of the old years. But when she stepped into the room, she stopped. Her eyes immediately fell on the framed drawing, now hung on the wall that once bore only overpriced abstract art devoid of emotion. Beautiful artwork, she said softly. My daughter made it, Daniel replied, without hesitation. And for the first time, those words left his lips naturally, confidently, as if they had always belonged to him, only he hadn't dared to say them until now. The sky was gray. Clouds gathered quietly along the horizon like the doubts of the board drawing near. Daniel stood before the mirror, adjusting his tie. Today would be a decisive day, not only for the corporation, but for his private life. Are you nervous? He asked as he saw Sophie standing in the kitchen, the blue dress they had picked together making her look radiant, but also fragile. She nodded, clutching a piece of toast like it held her last shred of confidence. What if no one likes my painting? Daniel tilted his head, smiled, a smile that had never once appeared in a strategy meeting. Then they have terrible taste in art, he replied, making Sophie giggle. But that won't happen. Your work is special. That moment, simple, honest, warm, made Daniel suddenly realize, sometimes, the ordinary is the most extraordinary thing he's ever experienced. And then, just as everything seemed to be finding its rhythm, the phone rang. The caller ID blinked, Linda Morgan. Mr. Daniel, her voice was tight as a piano wire, we have a situation, it requires your attention immediately. After the exhibition, he asked, glancing at Sophie, his heart already uneasy. I'm afraid not. Gregory Adams is here. With legal documents. He claims to be Emily's brother. And he's filing for custody of Sophie. A chill ran down Daniel's spine. Not from the wind outside, but from the deep fear of losing what he had just begun to love. I'm coming now. Don't say anything to them until I arrive, Daniel said, hanging up, his mind reeling. Emily had rarely spoken of her family. In all their years together, Daniel had never met anyone from her side. She once shared that they had disapproved of her choosing art over taking over the family business, that she had chosen freedom, and paid for it with solitude. "What's wrong?" Sophie asked, eyes wide with concern. Daniel knelt down to her level. "There's a little issue at the office. I need to take care of it before your presentation. Linda will take you to school. But I promise. I'll be there before you speak." Sophie nodded, her lips tightening slightly. No tears, no complaints, just the quiet acceptance of a child who'd learned that adults didn't always keep their word. "It's okay if you don't come. I understand." Daniel gently squeezed her hand. "I'll be there. That's a promise." At the downtown office, Daniel stepped into the room he used to enter as a titan. Today, he walked in as a father. Across from him sat Gregory Adams, a man with the polished look of a life insurance commercial, but eyes colder than steel. "I'm here to correct something that never should have happened," Gregory began without preamble. "My niece belongs with family, not with a man who ignored her existence for 8 years." Daniel clenched his fist, but his voice remained composed. "Where were you when Emily was dying? When Sophie was alone in a foster home?" Gregory didn't blink. "My sister chose her own path. But blood is blood. Sophie is a Gregory. And our family has the resources, the discipline, and the stability to raise her right." "You mean control her, like you tried to control Emily?" Daniel's voice was sharp as a scalpel. Gregory slid a folder across the table. "This is the official petition. We've requested an emergency hearing for next week." Daniel glanced at his lawyer, who flipped through the pages, his expression growing increasingly grim. "They're using your work schedule, recent internal conflicts, and media coverage as evidence," the lawyer whispered. Daniel stared at the documents. They've been watching. The paparazzi, the seemingly harmless articles, they were ammunition. He took a deep breath and looked up. "I will fight this," Daniel said, his voice calm to the point of being terrifying. "With everything I have." "You're going to lose," Gregory said, his tone flat, as if stating a mathematical fact rather than threatening to take away the most precious thing in a man's life. "The court always favors blood," he continued, buttoning his suit jacket mechanically. "Especially in cases involving traditional families, married parents, 3 grown children, stable academics, financial security, and most importantly, emotional stability." Daniel said nothing. The words, emotional stability, fell like shards of ice into his mind. "And you?" Gregory tilted his head, a cold smile flickering across his stiff face. "A CEO who just learned how not to spill milk, less than a month into playing house. What will you tell the judge? That you've got a drawing of the girl hanging in your living room?" The words hit a sore spot, because they held some truth. Daniel had been a father for less than a month. And no, he didn't have family park photos or a single Thanksgiving memory framed on a shelf. No fatherhood award. No hard proof, except for quiet mornings making cocoa, nighttime runs for nightmares, and a little girl's eyes looking at him like maybe, just maybe, he could become her hero. But as Daniel thought of Sophie's smile, how she had carefully reached for his hand during the school ceremony, the drawings she made of the two of them under the sun, those clumsy yet honest moments. He realized that was the evidence. "You might be blood," Daniel said, his voice low and rumbling like thunder after a storm. "But you are not her family. I am." When Gregory left, leaving behind a folder and the cold scent of expensive cologne, Daniel's lawyer only sighed. "It won't be easy, Daniel. The Gregory family has the upper hand in presenting a stable life. The court will consider many metrics. And we, to be honest, are on the defensive." Daniel looked at his watch. 40 minutes left until the art show. "Prepare whatever we need," he said, his voice as steady as stone. "I have somewhere else I need to be right now." At Ridgeview Academy, Daniel slipped quietly into the exhibition hall, where the students' artwork lined the walls like a vibrant timeline of childhood. He glimpsed paintings of sunflowers, playful animals, and bright, spontaneous brushstrokes. And then he saw her, his little girl, standing still beside a single painting that took his breath away. A lighthouse, perched on a cliff, casting light outward while a fierce storm raged in the sky. A vivid metaphor. A whisper from Sophie's heart. "You came," she whispered when she saw him, her face lighting up like the lighthouse itself had flickered to life. "I promised," Daniel said, kneeling to her level. "And I always keep my promises." Sophie's painting attracted a small crowd, students, a few parents, and Ms. Bennett, the silver-haired art teacher, who stood with the quiet smile of someone who had discovered a hidden gem. "She's talented," she whispered to Daniel. "Not just technically. But because, there's emotion in every stroke. Emily would be proud." Daniel nodded, unable to speak. Sophie chatted with the guests, explaining how she painted the light using white and yellow to contrast the storm. And why she left a streak of blue, a detail most missed. The sea still held hope. Watching his daughter glow, Daniel felt something rise inside him, not the cold pride of sealing a deal, but the deep emotion of someone who knows he matters in another person's life. When Sophie's name was called as the first-place winner in her age group, Daniel's applause was the loudest in the room. And the smile she gave him, stepping forward to accept the deep violet ribbon, sparkled brighter than any signature he'd ever won. That night, while celebrating with chocolate ice cream at home, Daniel sitting on the kitchen counter, Sophie swinging her legs, her scoop slowly melting, he knew it was time to tell the truth. "Sophie," he began, his voice soft like each word was made of glass. "There's something I need to tell you." She looked up, spoon paused mid-air. "Your mother's brother, Gregory, he's come forward. He says, you should live with his family." "I have an uncle." Sophie blinked, puzzled, like someone had told her she had an extra finger. Apparently, Daniel nodded. "He says you should live with blood relatives. But your mom, she never talked about him. And from what I know, they weren't close." Sophie put down her spoon. "Do I have to go?" Daniel shook his head firmly. "Not if I can help it. But there will be court hearings, lawyers, maybe even a judge. They'll want to know about your life with me. If you're happy." She nodded slowly, then asked in a quiet voice. "What if they make me leave?" Daniel reached out, took her hand, so small, so warm, so trusting. "I promise you this, Sophie. I'll do everything in my power to keep you where you belong." Then, almost as if whispering to himself, "Family isn't DNA. Family is who stays, who shows up, who puts you first. Like you did for me today." Sophie smiled, her eyes glistening but bright. "You came to my show, even with all the trouble. You chose me. That's the same as me choosing you." That night, after Sophie had gone to sleep, Daniel sat in his office, once the center of multimillion-dollar empires, now a war room for love. He called the best family law attorneys in the country. The fight ahead would be hard. Gregory had status, money, and the polished image of someone who represented traditional values. But Daniel had his daughter's heart. And for the first time in many years of building empires, he wasn't fighting for a balance sheet. He was fighting for something far more valuable. A home. When Linda Morgan called to report that the board was unhappy with his decision to compromise on the Singapore deal, Daniel simply said, "Tell them to proceed however they see fit." But, Linda hesitated. "I have a different priority now," Daniel said. "And this time, I'm not walking away." For 2 weeks, the legal battle for custody had eaten away at every cell of Daniel Whitmore's life. Everything that had once formed the image of his power, his packed meeting schedule, first-class flights, international calls between skyscrapers, was put on hold. The board of directors had assumed his absence would last only a few days. But when the strategic meeting regarding the Singapore deal came and went without him, all of Whitmore Global Holdings trembled. For the first time in the company's history, Daniel Whitmore officially activated the emergency succession plan. Without hesitation, he appointed Linda Morgan, his dedicated assistant for the past 7 years, as acting CEO. As for him, he now had only one job: to keep his daughter. All rise. The sharp voice of the court officer sliced through the tension in courtroom number 5 like a knife through taut string. Judge Maria Elena Martinez, a woman with neatly tied silver hair and eyes sharp as steel, entered the room. Daniel rose to his feet. His eyes immediately swept to the front row, where Sophie, in a simple blue dress, sat beside the court-appointed attorney. She was so small, her feet didn't reach the floor. Sophie's blonde hair was tied neatly as always, but her eyes betrayed her confusion. She looked around the grand, imposing room, trying to understand things no child should ever have to understand. Not far away, Gregory Adams and his wife, dressed in pale gray suits, back straight, mouths tight in righteous decorum, projected the image of a textbook perfect, all-American family. Gregory's lawyer approached the bench first, his tone smooth as syrup, clearly rehearsed long before today. "Your Honor," he began, "my client is the embodiment of stability. They have raised 3 accomplished children with both education and strong values. They have a long, happy marriage, are engaged in the community, and live in a cozy suburban home, where Sophie can thrive in every way." He paused, casting a subtle glance at Daniel. "Unlike Mr. Daniel, my client has blood ties, a clear family history, and the ability to provide not just material support but structure, tradition, and safety." Gregory then stood, his hands folded over his stomach like he was at a church altar. He spoke with unnerving calm. "We only want what's best for our niece. Mr. Daniel is a businessman, nothing more, nothing less. His schedule is erratic. His work comes first. I don't deny that he's trying, but fatherhood is not a part-time job." Daniel's lawyer rose in response. Detailed documents were presented: a reduced work schedule, a permanent guardianship application, a college fund in Sophie's name, and a timeline showing Daniel's presence at every moment Sophie had needed him, from her first breakfast to midnight nightmares. But Daniel could see the skepticism in Judge Martinez's eyes. And he understood. Every word, every number, wasn't enough. When it was his turn, Daniel stepped up to the witness stand, leaving the carefully drafted statement his lawyer had prepared behind. He looked up at the judge, then directly at Sophie, whose eyes had never left his. "Your Honor," he began, his voice low but steady, "I won't pretend to be a perfect father. I didn't even know I had a daughter until 8 weeks ago." He took a breath. "I've made many mistakes in my life, in business and in love. But one thing I've learned, being a father isn't about perfection. It's about choice. I chose Sophie. Every single day. From the moment I read that tiny letter under my dinner plate, I chose to stay. I chose to run to her in the middle of the night when she had nightmares, chose to learn how to make the right kind of cocoa, chose to go shopping for kids' clothes even though I couldn't tell the difference between size S and XS. The courtroom fell silent. I chose to stand by her when she painted that lighthouse. Chose to walk away from a billion-dollar deal to attend her art show. Chose to hand over the reins of my company so I could stand here today. And if given the chance, I would choose her again, 1,000,000 times over." Daniel turned toward the judge again, his voice quieter, a bit hoarse. "The Gregory family shares DNA with Sophie. But they don't know she sleeps with a photo of her mother under her pillow. They don't know she hums when she draws, just like Emily. They haven't seen how gentle, brave, and brilliant she is, more than most adults I've met. They claim blood makes a family. But where were they when Emily was dying? Where were they when Sophie was all alone? I may have arrived late," he finished, his voice cracking, "but I'm here. And I'm not going anywhere." No one said a word. Even Gregory looked away. The air was frozen, until Linda Morgan suddenly stood. "Your Honor," she said, requesting to testify. Linda delivered a detailed timeline, Every change Daniel had made, every unexpected but right decision, from the first time he bought pancakes for Sophie to the day he missed the most important strategic meeting of his life. "I've worked with Mr. Daniel for 7 years," she concluded. "I've seen him close deals that shook Wall Street. But nothing, and I emphasize, nothing has made him truly happy like becoming Sophie's father." Judge Martinez called a recess to deliberate. People quietly filed out of the courtroom. In the marble hallway, Daniel knelt beside Sophie, holding her hand. "No matter what happens, we face it together. You're not alone." She didn't speak, just nodded. But her tiny fingers clutched his tightly. Like someone holding on to the last light. For the first time since the custody battle began, Sophie wrapped her arms around Daniel's neck, a gentle hug, but strangely firm. "I knew it," she whispered, her voice so soft it seemed even the wind couldn't hear it, yet it echoed clearly in Daniel's heart, like the first drumbeat of a new life just beginning. He didn't answer with words. Instead, he simply held her a little tighter in his arms, as if to say, "I knew it too. And I'll never let you doubt it again." The next morning, Daniel stood in the doorway of Sophie's room, a cup of coffee in hand, watching the early sunlight slip through the ivory-white curtains, the kind they had picked out together during a spontaneous shopping trip. The room, once a lifeless space like any other living room of a busy CEO, had now taken form and spirit. The walls were painted a soft shade of blue, Sophie's favorite, because, in her words, it's the color of peaceful mornings. Simple wooden shelves were filled with books, watercolor palettes, and brushes. A corkboard on the wall looked like a personal gallery, full of drawings, little photographs, a movie ticket, an old birthday card, and a small scrap of paper with scrawled handwriting, "I like living here." It was no longer just a room in his home. It was Sophie's room. A sanctuary. Her world. A true home. On the bed, Sophie sat cross-legged, focused on sketching something. Her blonde hair fell forward across her face, and Daniel caught his breath. For a fleeting moment, he saw Emily again, the woman with an artist's soul, who had left him more than a child. She had given him a chance to make things right, to love, to truly live. "Morning, artist," he said softly. Sophie looked up, her eyes bright. "I'm making something for your office," she said, her voice full of excitement and a hint of secrecy. "Another masterpiece for my collection?" Daniel teased, stepping into the room. "Maybe," she smiled, quickly hiding her sketchpad behind her back. "It's a surprise." Daniel laughed, a genuine laugh, uncalculated. A rarity once reserved for billion-dollar deals. Now, a single word from Sophie could make him smile. His phone rang again. The 4th time in an hour. Caller ID, Linda Morgan. The board wanted to urgently discuss his absence from the Singapore deal. Daniel looked at the phone, then silenced it. Today, he had something more important to do. "Pancakes?" he asked. "With blueberries?" Sophie asked in return, her eyes as bright as a spring sunrise. "Absolutely," he grinned. "Nothing's impossible." In the kitchen, they moved like a perfect pair. Sophie measured the batter. Daniel warmed the pan. They moved in harmony, as if they'd been doing it their whole lives. No dashboards, no urgent emails, no Zoom calls. Just batter, clinking spoons, and laughter. One slightly lopsided pancake, which Daniel jokingly called "me in high school," made Sophie burst into giggles. "Do you have an important meeting today?" Sophie asked, casually, but Daniel heard the worry tucked inside her words. He paused, then turned to her. "Nothing is more important than being here with you," he said firmly. Sophie was quiet for a moment, then softly said, "Mom used to say, time is the most precious gift you can give someone you love." Daniel nodded. "Your mom was right. She was always right." After breakfast, Sophie pulled a neatly folded sheet of paper from her drawer. "Mom made this for me," she said, handing it to him. Daniel opened it. It was a hand-drawn family tree, in colored pencil, filled with flowers, branches, hearts, and a glowing sun. At the top was Emily, her name surrounded by tiny flowers and radiating golden light. Below were Daniel and Sophie, their names connected by a sturdy branch, carefully drawn as if even a crooked line might break the bond between them. In the corner was a line, Emily's handwriting, one he recognized from an old letter. Love doesn't live in grand gestures. It lives in the choices we make each day. He was still. In that moment, every courtroom wall, every financial report, every shareholder agreement, faded. I think Mom would be happy now, Sophie whispered. Daniel couldn't speak. He just nodded, and held her tight. That afternoon, Daniel called a board meeting. He stood before those who once saw him as the greatest profit machine, and declared, "I'm not leaving the company. But I'm stepping back from daily operations. I'll focus on strategic direction, the rest, I leave to the team I trust. Because now, I have a bigger strategy to carry out." Fatherhood. Some board members were stunned. A few nodded. Linda Morgan smiled, a rare smile reserved for the bravest and most rightful choices. That evening, Daniel and Sophie stood on the penthouse balcony, the city lights twinkling beneath them like a sea of stars. "Do you miss work all the time?" Sophie asked, her head resting on his shoulder. Daniel thought for a moment. "I miss the certainty. In business, everything has a process. With people," he chuckled, "everything's messy." "Like me?" Sophie asked playfully. "Especially you," Daniel brushed a strand of hair from her face, eyes gentle. "But that's what makes it worth it." "Sometimes I miss Mom a lot," Sophie said, her voice suddenly quiet. "I know," Daniel replied, eyes distant. "I wish you had been there earlier, for both of us." "So do I. But now you're here," she said, as if concluding a long equation. And she was right. Daniel Whitmore, who once defined success by skyscrapers and 8-figure bank accounts, finally understood what true wealth meant. It wasn't in the contracts. Not in the shares. Not in shareholder applause. It lived in star-shaped pancakes. In messy, heartfelt drawings. In the hand of an 8-year-old girl holding his and calling him Dad. Daniel Whitmore's greatest achievement would never be recorded in a boardroom memo. She was standing right beside him. Holding his hand. Teaching him how to love. And just like that, the journey of a man who once lived to work came to a close, only to open a brand new chapter in life, living to love, to be loved, and to be a father. Daniel Whitmore, once featured on the covers of financial magazines with headlines like, "The Strategic Genius," now felt prouder to be called something simpler, shorter, yet infinitely more sacred, Dad. Not everyone gets a second chance in life. Not everyone has the courage to take it when it comes. But Daniel chose to step out of his comfort zone, to leave the boardrooms where people nodded at his power, and to enter a world where every smile, every hug, and every innocent question was real, vivid, and full of love. And in the end, it's not the one who generates the most profit who is the most successful. But the one who knows how to hold a child's hand when they need it most. If you felt this story touched your heart, leave a comment below, tell us what moved you the most, or if you've ever witnessed someone change because of love, just like Daniel. Hit like if you believe that loving choices, made every day, can change an entire life. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss more heartfelt, meaningful, and deeply human stories like this one. We cherish every view, every word shared, because a story truly lives only when someone listens. Thank you for walking alongside Daniel and Sophie. We look forward to seeing you again in the next story.